Okay. Next. So now we're going to look at integrative bargaining, which is a bit more gentle, friendly, okay? It's more relationship building rather than knocking the other party down, okay? See, everybody's happy here. Friendly, shaking hands, it's not fighting, not arguing, not a lot of bluffing, okay? It's win-win. Now, integrative bargaining is also called interest-based. And the reason we call it interest-based is because there is more sharing of information that is required between the opposing people. Meaning, you take an interest in what their position is. Why do you want all of this? And why do I want what I want? By sharing information, you can work towards a more of a common interest win-win scenario. Make sense? So just remember, integrative is also called interest-based. So, integrative bargaining is often referred to as win-win, typically entails 2 or more issues to be negotiated. It often involves an agreement process that better integrates the aims and goals of all the involved negotiating parties through creative and collaborative problem solving. Relationship is usually very important in interest-based bargaining. More complex issues being negotiated than with distributive bargaining. So you will find that most complex negotiations usually work towards what we call integrative or interest-based bargaining. Simply because distributive bargaining just does not build relationships, it destroys them. So, characteristics. Honesty and integrity are part of integrated bargaining. So, the ability to establish a trusting environment between the parties. So you're not constantly trying to trick the other person. Not that there's no tactics involved, okay? But there's more of an honest, non-bluffing type of process. Abundance mentality, the realization that making a concession will build stronger long-term relationships. So if you're interested in repeat business with a person, then you want to go through win-win to build relationships. Maturity is having the courage to recognize mutual issues and values. Systems orientation is the ability to take a more holistic approach rather than focusing on individual issues. What does holistic mean? Anybody know? Holistic. Holistic is like looking at the whole picture rather than just parts. You're looking at the whole thing, okay? Not just individual parts. Listening skills, the recognition that effective listening requires avoidance of only considering one's own frame of reference. So you are considering your opponent's needs. Elements of successful integrative bargaining. 1, parties must understand each other's true needs and objectives. And the only way you can do that is to share information. Parties create a free flow of information and exchange of ideas. They focus on where they have similarities and commonalities rather than where we're different. So they look for common ground. Make sense? See, too much lunch. See, you're starting to fade. I can feel it. I see people rubbing their eyes. Oh, I'm sleepy now. Okay, too bad.
Very interesting.
What's interesting? Oh, I thought you said taking a nap was very interesting. Also, number 4. Both parties must engage in a search for solutions that meet the goals of both sides. So, I can't meet my opponent's goals if I don't know what they are. So we have to have much more conversation before we start negotiating. We need to discover their must-haves, my must-haves, their goals, my goals, and that way work together so that we can create joint value rather than simply, I want to win and you're going to lose. Make sense? So when you're answering the question on the exam, what is the difference between integrative and distributive bargaining, you'll know the answer, right? I just gave it to you. What?
Again, no, the question, sir, excuse me.
We already covered distributive bargaining. What's the difference between distributive and integrative? Integrative is win-win. You share information, okay? You take an interest in, making your opponent satisfied. So, this is an example, very simple example, of integrated or interest-based bargaining. What?
The orange gun?
No, it's a different one. You remember? I'm impressed. That was actually integrated bargaining. Yeah. Two men are quarreling or arguing in a library. That's horrible. One wants the window open and the other wants the window closed. They argue back and forth about how much to leave the window open. A crack, halfway, 3/4 of the way, or not at all. That's the argument. No solution satisfies them both. So, enter the librarian, the mediator. She asks one man why he wants the window open. Why? So now we're looking at both sides. What is your driver? What's your motivation? You can't have a win-win scenario unless you ask, why do you want this? Make sense? So, she asks the man why he wants the window open, and he responds to get some fresh air. She then asks the other man why he wants it closed. I want to avoid the draft. So, one wants fresh air, and the other person wants to avoid the draft. So, what's the solution? What's the win-win scenario? After thinking for a minute, she opens wide a window in the next room, bringing in fresh air, but without a draft. Does that make sense? It's a win-win scenario. But you see, unless you took the time to find out why you have this position and why this person has their position, you're not going to be able to come up with a win-win scenario. So you have to take the time, rather than beat the other person to death in distributive bargaining and winning, take the time to find out why are you taking that position? What is your interest? That's why it's called interest-based. The why factor. Yes?
Is this situational? In some situations you have to use integrated bargaining, and with other people you have to be...
Distributive. Yeah, there are some scenarios that will always be distributive. Example. I'm a company and I fire you, right? We have a complaint resolution procedure. So, if you go to the complaint resolution procedure, you go through a series of steps. A determination will be made whether you keep your job or whether you lose your job, ultimately, right? That's always a distributive process. You can't have a win-win scenario because you can't be fired and not be fired. It's got to be one or the other. That's distributive, always. Same thing with a raise. You either get a raise, you don't get a raise. That's distributive. Okay? Does that answer your question? So, you can't always have integrative or win-win scenarios. They don't always work. Go ahead.
If you share more information with your opponent, he may misuse this to get more leverage or better position for him.
Yes, which is why if you're going to do integrative bargaining, there has to be a level of trust between the parties. You're right. If you enter a negotiation for the first time with someone, and you start sharing information, now that person uses the information you gave them to leverage you, and now they may work on a distributive methodology where you were hoping for an interest-based methodology. Which is why when you start a negotiation for the first time, you have to decide ahead of time. Are we going to work on a distributive basis, or are we going to work on a win-win integrated basis? You have to establish that up front. If it's the first time. If it's somebody you do repeat business with, you can assume it's going to be interest-based or integrated.
Can we mix the two
Um,
in some cases?
yeah, to a point. The only thing you can mix, that's a good question. The only thing you can mix, some of the bluffing, the tactics, you can sometimes pull some of those into interest-based or integrated bargaining. You can bring some of those in.
For example, we know that at the end of this negotiation, it's not going to be win-win. One of them will take, but they start as integrated, like coordinating in some other interests, for example, yeah, exchanging some experience or something like that.
Well, if you're saying, could that happen? Yes. You could start on an integrated basis, on good terms, and by the time you're done, you hate each other. Well, not hate each other, but, you start on integrated, you start with a win-win scenario, but end up with a win-lose. If that's happening, then your process was flawed. You see what I'm saying? You didn't spend enough time discovering each other's must-haves and whys. Okay? Does that make sense? I'm not saying that's not going to happen, but it shouldn't happen. You shouldn't start off with integrative and wind up with distributive. It's not considered bargaining in good faith. If you're going to end up with distributive, then you might as well just stay with the distributive process right through. Okay? Does that make sense? So if you start integrative and wind up distributive, something went wrong. Unless you planned it that way.
Yeah, they plan.
Well, if you planned it that way and both parties were aware of that, then fine.
Sometimes, the lengthy process that we are going through, it changes the whole, the outcome.
Yeah, sometimes it gets so dragged out, you fall into distributive process at the end. That can happen, yes. Okay, yeah. So, types of interest in integrative bargaining. You have substantive interest, process interest, interest in principle, relationship interest, and no, this is not on your exam, in case you were wondering. Substantive. Interests that are related to economic and financial issues. So, if you're sharing information that is related to economics or financial, those are considered substantive interests. Process interests are like what you just said. What kind of tactics and bargaining are we going to use? Normally you decide in advance, well, I think we're going to use distributive bargaining. Or you might say, you know what, I think we can reach mutual agreement, but I think we may want to use some distributive tactics. But try to work for a win-win scenario. I mean, you can discuss this in advance. Okay. I don't know if that's a good way to go, though. But it just depends. Relationship. Indicate that one or both parties value their relationship with the other and they want to avoid damaging it. So if you're discussing this, you're probably leaning more towards integrative bargaining. Okay? Interest in principle, what is fair, what is right, what is acceptable, and of course, what is ethical. And that depends where you're negotiating. Because what's ethical in one place may not be ethical in another. Some people consider bluffing unethical. They consider bluffing lying, and therefore it's unethical. It just depends on your culture and belief systems. Does that make sense? I mean, how many people here think bluffing is unethical?
It's lying illegal, I'm sorry. It's lying illegal in some.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
That's why you said things before. Not everything is illegal, is unethical.
Well, no, yeah, I said, well, if you look globally,
As example,
what is, on a global scale, if something is unethical, it doesn't mean it's illegal. I'll give you the example. Let me give you an example. I'm better on examples. And I got a million examples in my head, as you can tell. That comes with age. Everybody knows Nike, right? Nike products. Years ago, Nike got into a real situation when it was discovered that a lot of Nike products that were being manufactured in China were being manufactured in a facility that hired child labor. Anybody remember that? It was a major scandal. Okay? And now, there's a situation. most of Nike's customers, particularly in the US, felt this was unethical practice, and they said unless Nike changes it, they're going to stop buying Nike products. Nike came back and said, well, you may consider it unethical, but in China, it's legal. We are not breaking the law. So there you have a distinct difference between something considered unethical and something considered legal. Okay? It was legal, but it was considered unethical. Okay? Did Nike change their process? Yes. Later on. Why? Customer pressure. Customer pressure. Yeah, they went, so even though it wasn't illegal, okay? So that's a good example of what we're talking about, right? And there are things, yeah, I'll give you another example real quick. Chemical company operating out of California in the United States, they are being fined because they are releasing too many pollutants in the air, the ground, and the surrounding water. So they are an environmental hazard. They're getting fined by the Environmental Protection Agency. Very strict laws in the United States, particularly in the state of California. What did they do? Did they clean up their act? No. They moved their operation to Mexico. Why? Because Mexico has less stringent environmental regulations. So, was moving the company illegal? No. But moving it to a country where they could legally pollute the water, the ground, and the air is definitely unethical. See the difference? And that actually happened, by the way. Okay. So, some goals in the integrative bargaining process. You have a common goal, a shared goal, or joint goal. Very simply, common goal, a goal that all the parties share equally and will enjoy similar benefits. It's a common goal. So, by settling, let's say you have a strike going on with the union. You settle the strike with the union. That's a common goal. Why? Well, because now the company can resume operations, and all the striking union employees go back to work and get a paycheck. It's a common goal to settle the strike. Okay? A shared goal is a goal that both parties work towards, but the benefits each party differently. So, profit-sharing plan at a company is distributed based on experience or capital investment. It's kind of like what I was talking about before. When you get a bonus plan, okay, at work, all right, a shared goal. A shared goal means everybody participates in the bonus plan, but depending upon your level in the hierarchy, that will be dependent on how much of an amount you get. So even though everybody shares, it's not an equal share. Okay? We share, but some people may get a 30% bonus at one level, the next level down, some people may get a 25% bonus, 20% bonus. So that by the time you get down to the manufacturing floor, they may get a 3 to 5% bonus. So not everybody gets the same bonus, but everybody shares in the bonus. Make sense? Okay. Joint goals, a goal that involves parties with different personal goals agreeing to combine them in a collective effort. So, the common example here is a political party factions join together to support the same party candidate. As an example, I don't know how this would work in other countries. I can only give you the yeah. Everybody familiar with the U.S. presidential elections? All right, here's the example. The Republican Party is going to nominate somebody to run for president against Barack Obama.
Are you Republican, sir?
I never divulge my political affiliation. You can probably guess what it is. So, who do I have? I have Mitt Romney. I have Jeb Bush. I have Marco Rubio. Who else? I have Rick Santorum. And I have, I think of one other guy. Oh, Rand Paul. We'll put Rand Paul in there because he's the libertarian guy. I'm more libertarian, by the way, than Republican. Okay? Small government. People should be allowed to do what they want to do as long as they don't violate the law, that kind of thing. So, I have 5 people running for the Republican nomination for president to run against Barack Obama. Got it? I'm looking at joint goals. So, after months of beating each other to death here, one candidate emerges to be the elected candidate to run against Obama. Who is it? Mitt Romney. Right? Now, all of these people who were fighting for the nomination now join together, joint goal to support who? Romney. They all, because we're all Republicans, so we're all going to, even though we had our differences in the primary, now that Mitt Romney's been chosen to run against Obama, now all of them join together to support Mitt Romney. They now have a joint goal, and that is to beat President Obama. Before, their goal was to become the Republican nominee for president. Now their joint goal is to beat Obama, so they all support Mitt Romney. Except Rand Paul, he probably didn't. Everybody got that?
Yeah.
It's the best explanation I can give. That's a joint goal.
We come in the exam? No.
Nah. But none of that's on the exam. Don't worry about it. Trust. Since mistrust inhibits collaboration, negotiators utilize tactics to ensure a level of trust between parties. So, trust means both parties in a negotiation, they share information and they encourage reciprocal agreements going back and forth. That's part of integrative bargaining. They negotiate multiple offers at the same time, and they make multiple offers at the same time. So there are a variety of different offers going back and forth across the table, okay, in integrative bargaining. It's a matter of what they call the trust factor. When you're doing distributive bargaining, there's a lot less trust. In fact, just the opposite. You have overly suspicious people in a distributive bargain. They're suspicious of one another. In an integrative, there has to be more trust between the two parties. Okay? Otherwise, it just doesn't work well. Got it? Now, in the slides that you will get or have gotten already, obviously there's a lot more detail. You know, I'm just kind of pulling out the highlights because we'd be sitting here for 3 days otherwise. You wouldn't want to do that. Okay. So,